Every mother's worst fear is losing a child. For Janet Williams, that fear became a living nightmare. All she has left of her daughter Emily is a worn teddy bear. Its fur is faded, one eye is missing, and it still carries the faint scent of her little girl. Janet holds it close every night, whispering the words she never got to say. But Janet isn't just mourning. She's haunted by the truth she's carried in silence for 30 years. Her voice trembles as she breaks her silence. I've kept quiet about what they did to my little girl, but I can't stay silent anymore, not when more children are dying. 5 children, 1 month, all diagnosed with the same rare cancer. In Marion, Indiana, a small town where everyone knows each other, this is no coincidence. Doctors are baffled. They've never seen anything like it, but Janet has, and so have I. I'm Amy Richardson. This story is personal. My mother worked at the factory no one dared to talk about. She died trying to expose the truth. Her last words to me were, "Keep digging, Amy. Don't let them bury it." What started as my search for answers has turned into a nightmare I never saw coming. The company responsible for this isn't just still in business, they're expanding. 12 more towns across the Midwest are next on their list. 12 towns just like Marion. 12 towns where children play, families grow, and parents tuck their kids into bed without knowing the danger lurking beneath their feet. This isn't just about Marion, it's about your town, your children, your future. Last week, someone broke into my home. They didn't steal anything, they didn't leave fingerprints, but they did leave a note. Stop digging or join your mother. That's when I knew they're watching me, just like they watched her. But this isn't just a story about the past. It's a warning about right now. Because yesterday, another child was diagnosed with the same cancer, and the company responsible is coming to a town near you. What I'm about to show you was hidden for 3 decades, buried deep where no one would ever look. The evidence is clear, the connection's undeniable. The only question is, how many more children have to die before someone speaks up? Marion, Indiana. It looks like any small American town. Quiet streets, perfect lawns, friendly neighbors, a place where everyone knows each other. But beneath this picture-perfect surface lies a deadly secret. A secret that has killed children for 3 decades. It all started when I found my mother's journals. She wrote about strange smells coming from the factory on the edge of town, about children getting sick and then disappearing from playgrounds, classrooms, lives. She wrote until the day she died. They said it was an accident, but now I know better. My mother was murdered, and she wasn't the only one silenced for asking questions. For 30 years, Marion kept its secrets. People whispered, but no one spoke up. Too many were afraid of losing their jobs, their families, their lives. But now children are dying again, 5 in the past month, all with the same rare cancer, and no one can explain why. No one. Except the factory that's been poisoning this town for decades. The same factory that paid off doctors, bribed officials, and buried the truth. I went to the one person who might still have answers, Sheriff James Blackwood. He's been on the force for 30 years, seen everything this town has tried to hide. But when I asked him about the factory, his hands shook. His voice was low, almost a whisper. "Look, Amy, I've got a wife who's sick, medical bills piling up. But what I saw in those files, I can't take it to my grave. Kids are dying again." He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a worn folder. Inside were autopsy reports, dozens of them, all marked inconclusive, all from children. He looked me in the eye, his face pale. "They made me bury these, threatened my family if I didn't. I'm retiring next month. But before I go, people need to know the truth." Then there's Robert Hayes, a man who seems to have it all. Wealth, power, influence. His family built this town. His grandfather brought the factory here. His father expanded it. And Robert? He's kept it running. But he's also a man haunted by guilt, because his own grandson just got diagnosed with the same cancer that's killed so many other children. I met with him last week. He tried to hide his tears, but his voice broke. "My family did this. We brought that factory here. We made it grow, and now it's killing my grandson. I wanted to hate him, but all I saw was a grandfather watching his legacy destroy his own bloodline." The next day, I went to the elementary school. It looked just like the one I went to as a kid. Laughter echoed through the playground, children's voices bright and carefree, but they were playing over poison. A construction crew was digging nearby, laying the foundation for a new gym. That's when they found it. Buried just a few feet below the surface. Metal drums. Dozens of them. Rusted, leaking, right where our children play. The worker who found them, Mike Stevens, couldn't stop shaking during our interview. His face was pale as he told me. That smell, I'll never forget it, burned my throat, made my eyes water. And then I saw it, my daughter's charm bracelet down there in the dirt. His daughter disappeared in 1993. He never stopped searching. And now he knew why he never found her. The doctors are saying what everyone's afraid to admit. The children showing symptoms now have 2 to 3 weeks before the damage becomes permanent. And more kids are getting sick every day. I tried to find out more. Requested documents about past cases, but every time the files were missing. Yesterday, a fire broke out in the records room. Destroyed everything going back 30 years. Someone's trying to bury the truth again. But this time, we have proof. A former factory worker reached out to me this morning. Her voice was shaking. "Meet me at midnight," she said. "I'll tell you what really happened to your mother, but be careful, they're watching your house." She didn't say who they were, but I already knew. The real question isn't who's responsible for these deaths. We know who they are. The question is who's going to stop them before more children die. That midnight meeting changed everything, but not in the way I expected. I arrived at the abandoned lot just before midnight. The wind was cold, carrying a faint chemical smell that burned my throat. The factory worker promised she'd tell me what really happened to my mother. She knew too much, and she was ready to talk, but she never showed up. Instead, I found her car, empty, engine still warm. The door was open. The driver's seat was stained with blood. On the passenger seat, a note, "They're coming for me, tell everyone." My heart raced as I read those words. She tried to warn me, but now she was gone. I called the police, but when they arrived, they didn't take pictures, didn't bag the evidence. They just towed her car away, telling me it was a routine disappearance. A routine disappearance with blood on the seat. Someone was covering this up, and they were getting desperate. The next morning, the FBI showed up at my door. Agent Emily Martinez. She was sharp, focused, her eyes filled with urgency. She looked at the note, and her face went pale. "This isn't just Marion anymore," she said. "This is national." She opened a file and showed me pictures. Children from different towns, different faces, same haunted eyes, all sick with the same rare cancer, all living near factories owned by the same company. "We've been tracking this for years," she explained, "but every time we get close, witnesses disappear, evidence goes missing, and now it's happening here." I realised then that this was bigger than my mother's death, bigger than Marion. This was a national conspiracy. Agent Martinez called in a federal team to search the factory, but before they could enter, local officials blocked the warrant. Mayor Thompson called it a waste of resources. The same Mayor Thompson whose signature appears on 30 years of buried safety reports. Then people started getting scared, real scared. Mark Davis, a local teacher, reached out to me. He wanted to talk about his students getting sick, but the morning of our interview, someone left dead birds on his porch. His daughter's school picture had X's drawn over her eyes. His hands were shaking when he called me. "I'm sorry, I've got 3 kids. I can't risk it." Fear was spreading like poison. No one felt safe, not even me. That night, I heard footsteps outside my window. I looked out and saw shadows moving. Then, silence. The next morning, my front door was open. Nothing was taken. But there was a message carved into the wood. "Stop digging." They wanted to scare me. But it only made me more determined, because the evidence kept coming. We mapped the underground water flow from the factory. Every single child who got sick lived downstream. Every single one. 47 children dead in 30 years, all with the same rare cancer, all within a mile of the factory's water runoff. Then, we found the company's secret expansion plans. 12 new factories, 12 new towns, all built on the same deadly design as Marion. This wasn't just a cover-up, it was a business plan. But the biggest betrayal was still coming. Robert Hayes, the council member who seemed so concerned, who cried about his grandson's cancer, who looked me in the eye and said his family was innocent. He lied. We found documents in his grandfather's storage unit, detailed reports showing exactly how the chemicals would spread, how long it would take to reach each neighborhood. They knew what would happen to those children, and they did it anyway. Because Hayes' family didn't just bring the factory to Marion, they designed the contamination. Last night, Hayes' son was rushed to the hospital. Same symptoms, same cancer. The doctors gave him 3 weeks to live. An hour ago, Hayes called me. His voice was breaking. My family did this. We killed those kids, and now it's killing my son. He was about to tell me everything about the cover-up, about the company's real agenda. Then I heard a crash, a scream. The line went dead. I tried calling him back. No answer. I drove to his house. The door was open. Furniture overturned. Glass shattered. Blood on the floor. Robert Hayes was gone. But there was one thing left behind, a file on his desk. Inside was a USB drive and a handwritten note. If you're reading this, I'm probably dead. But what I'm about to show you will bring down the biggest chemical company in America. Just remember, they'll kill to keep this quiet, and they know where you live. My hands were shaking as I held the drive. It felt heavy, like a loaded gun, because whatever was on it was dangerous enough to kill for. I plugged it into my laptop and opened the first file. It was worse than I ever imagined. Internal emails, memos, reports, proof that the company knew. Proof that they chose profit over children's lives. Proof that they've been doing this for decades. But before I could read more, my computer screen went black. Lines of code flashed. Then a message appeared. "You've gone too far, Amy. Stop digging, or join your mother." My heart stopped. They were watching me, right now. Then my phone rang, a blocked number. I answered, my voice shaking. "Who is this?" A cold voice replied, "Walk away, Amy, or you'll be buried just like the others." The line went dead. I was alone in my house, holding evidence that could destroy them. Evidence they were willing to kill for. But I couldn't stop now. Too many children were dying. Too many secrets were buried, and I wasn't going to let them bury me too. This was no longer just about exposing the truth. This was about survival, because now they were hunting me. But what they didn't know was I was ready to fight back, and this time I wasn't digging alone. What I uncovered next would change everything, but first I had to stay alive long enough to expose it. What Robert Hayes left behind was more than just evidence. It was a confession. I plugged the USB drive into my laptop, my hands still shaking. Files appeared on the screen, hundreds of them, internal emails, memos, reports. The first document was from 1992, a memo from the CEO. Cost analysis shows proper disposal exceeds $4.2 million. Alternative methods save us over $3 million. The liability risk is acceptable. They knew. They knew exactly what those chemicals would do. They weighed children's lives against profits and chose profit. Page after page, the story unfolded. They didn't just poison Marion, they tracked it, measured it. They even mapped out which neighborhoods would get sick first. They watched as cancer rates rose, and they did nothing. No. They did worse than nothing. They covered it up. In another memo, a PR executive suggested, blame lifestyle factors, smoking, poor diet, use local doctors to validate. They paid doctors to lie, to tell grieving parents that it was their fault, not the poison in the water. But the worst was yet to come. An internal report from 1997 revealed a chilling pattern. The chemicals had a signature, a unique combination that spread through the groundwater, and it was spreading faster than they expected. One executive wrote, projected contamination to reach neighboring counties by 2025, recommend expansion to dilute liability. They were planning to expand not to fix the problem, but to bury it, to spread the poison across 12 more towns, 12 new communities who had no idea what was coming. I stared at the screen, feeling sick. This wasn't negligence. This was murder. I called Dr. Ellen Garcia, a toxicologist who had been helping me analyze the water samples. Her voice was heavy. I've seen this chemical signature before, in Warren, Ohio, in Millbrook, Alabama, in 12 different communities where children died from the same rare cancer. It's the same poison. She paused, her voice breaking. This wasn't an accident, Amy. They knew. They've been doing this for decades. The medical evidence was clear. Every child diagnosed in the last 30 years showed the same damage pattern. The chemicals attacked the nervous system first, then spread to organs. It was slow enough that most people didn't connect it to the factory until it was too late. But the contamination wasn't just in the past. It was happening right now. Those barrels they buried years ago, they were leaking, seeping into the regional water supply. Tests showed the contamination was spreading to 3 neighbouring counties. Over 200,000 people were at risk. I called Sheriff James Blackwood. He picked up on the first ring. His voice was strained. I knew it was bad, but not like this. He agreed to meet me at his office. When I arrived, he was standing by his filing cabinet, holding a stack of old police reports. His hands were shaking. "I kept copies," he whispered. "I couldn't destroy them, not after seeing those kids' faces." The reports detailed dozens of complaints about the factory, strange smells, dead wildlife, contaminated wells. Every single report was marked resolved without investigation. At the bottom of each page was a signature, the head of security at the factory. He was the one who buried the evidence, literally. Sheriff Blackwood looked at me, his eyes red. "They paid me to look the other way, but I can't do it anymore. Not when kids are dying again." He handed me the reports, his shoulders heavy with guilt. "I've buried too many children. I won't bury the truth." Then the phone on his desk rang. He answered it, his face going pale. He looked at me, fear in his eyes. "There's been an incident at Marion Elementary." We raced to the school. Emergency alarms were blaring. Teachers were leading children out of the building, their faces pale with fear. 5 students collapsed before they made it out. Their skin was pale, eyes unfocused. Early symptoms of the same cancer. Dr. Samantha Lewis, the local pediatrician, ran towards us, tears in her eyes. "It's in the air. The chemicals, they're leaking. We have 18 days before the damage becomes permanent." I've got 23 children showing early symptoms. Without immediate intervention, they won't make it. The pattern was repeating, the same poison, the same symptoms, and this time the contamination was spreading faster than anyone realised. Robert Hayes survived the attack at his home. He called me from the hospital. His voice was weak, broken. "My grandfather made the deal that brought the factory here. My father expanded it, and I approved their waste disposal permits. We did it for jobs, for the economy. I never thought, oh God, what have we done?" He confessed to everything. The secret meetings, the payoffs, the cover-ups. He handed over documents going back to 1989, charts showing exactly which neighbourhoods would be affected first, studies predicting how many children would get sick each year. They knew how many children would die. And they did it anyway. I asked him why his family didn't stop it. He looked at me, tears streaming down his face. "We were afraid of losing everything. But now I've lost my son, and I have to live with that." Just then, my phone buzzed. A text from Sheriff Blackwood. "I found more files, but they're watching me. Meet me at the old church. Come alone." I turned back to Robert, but his eyes were closed. His heart monitor was flatlining. His secret died with him. I looked down at the documents in my hands. The evidence was there, enough to bring down the biggest chemical company in America. But someone was willing to kill to keep it quiet. And now, they knew I had the proof. I was getting closer to the truth. But with every step, they were closing in. And if I wasn't careful, I'd be the next to disappear. Linda Cartwright had been silent for 28 years. She watched her neighbours bury their children. She watched families fall apart. She kept her head down, stayed quiet, until now. I met her in a small diner on the edge of town. She looked over her shoulder twice before speaking, her voice trembling. "I worked in the factory's environmental compliance office. For almost 3 decades, they made me fake reports, change test results, ignore safety violations. I thought no one would believe me. But then I saw your mother asking questions. She was getting too close. Her eyes were red, haunted. After what happened to her, I got scared, but I can't stay silent anymore, not when more kids are dying." She slid a folder across the table. Inside were copies of every report she was ordered to fake. Evidence that proved the company knew exactly what they were doing. They knew the chemicals were deadly, they knew they were poisoning children, and they did it anyway. The next morning, I handed the files to Agent Emily Martinez. She stared at the documents, her face turning pale. "This is the smoking gun. This proves they knew, and they covered it up. every step of the way. That afternoon, federal agents raided the company's headquarters. Executives were led out in handcuffs. The CEO, the board members, the regional managers who carried out their orders. Their faces were blank, emotionless. They didn't look at the cameras. They didn't look at the families standing outside. They just looked down, like they were ashamed. US Attorney Michael Reed didn't hold back during the press conference. This is the largest environmental crimes case in American history. We've documented a 30-year conspiracy that caused hundreds of deaths. The charges include knowing endangerment, criminal negligence, obstruction of justice, and first-degree murder. No one is above the law, not even billion-dollar corporations. The news spread like wildfire. People were outraged. Communities that were once silent began to speak up. They demanded testing, investigations, accountability. The company's stock plummeted. They filed for bankruptcy within weeks. The court ordered their assets liquidated to create a fund for victims. It wouldn't bring back the dead, but it would pay for medical monitoring for the next 50 years. It would help families who lost loved ones, and it would fund research into better treatments. Dr. Samantha Lewis led the medical team fighting to save the children who were already sick. She worked around the clock using experimental treatments based on the company's own research. Research they kept secret because it proved they knew exactly what their chemicals did. 3 weeks after the raids, she called me with tears in her eyes. It's working. The treatment, it's reversing the damage. We caught it in time. They're going to live. The National Guard set up containment barriers around the factory. The EPA brought in specialized equipment to filter the water supply. FEMA established temporary housing for families in the most contaminated areas. For Janet Williams, the news was bittersweet. She stood by her daughter's grave, holding the teddy bear she kept for 30 years. I kept fighting because I couldn't let another mother feel what I felt. Emily would be 36 now. She might have had her own children. That was stolen from her, from me. But now, other families won't have to know that pain. Marion began to heal. The town that kept its secrets for 30 years was finally speaking up. Robert Hayes pleaded guilty to his role in the cover-up. In his plea agreement, he agreed to visit communities nationwide, warning them about the tactics companies used to silence opposition. His voice cracked as he spoke at his first town hall. I was wrong. I chose money over lives. I can't undo that, but I can spend the rest of my life trying to make it right. Sheriff James Blackwood retired from the force, but he didn't stop fighting. He helped form a national victims advocacy group. They worked with Congress to create new safety standards. Standards that would have saved lives in Marion decades ago. His voice was steady, but his eyes were heavy with guilt. We can't change the past, but we're making damn sure this never happens again. Not on our watch. Linda Cartwright still looked over her shoulder when she went out. Old habits die hard, but she wasn't hiding anymore. Your mother tried to warn everyone, she told me one afternoon. She knew what was happening, and they silenced her. Emma, I wish I'd been brave enough to help her then. But I'm speaking up now, for her, for all the others we lost. I visited my mother's grave that evening. I brought her favorite flowers and whispered the words I wished she could hear. We did it, Mom. They tried to bury the truth, but we dug it up. We made them pay, and Marion is healing. But this battle isn't over. The investigation uncovered a pattern. We found the same contamination in 34 other communities. Other companies using the same playbook. Other families losing children while officials looked away. But now people are speaking up. Communities are demanding answers. The silence that protected the guilty for so long is breaking. Last week, I received a call from a mother in Millbrook, Alabama. Her son was diagnosed with the same rare cancer. The factory in her town uses the same chemicals. She asked me what she should do. I told her to fight, to dig, to never stop asking questions, because the next Marion is out there. And together, we can stop it before more children die. If you're watching this and recognize these signs in your own community, there are resources to help. The number on your screen connects you to advocates who can guide you through testing, reporting, and protection. You are not alone. Your voice matters. This is Amy Richardson, reporting from Marion, Indiana, A town that kept its secrets for 30 years. A town that's finally healing. A town whose story might just save your community next. If you're watching this, don't wait until it's too late. Speak up, dig deeper, save lives, because the truth is worth fighting for. Before you go, if you want to be the first to know when we uncover the next buried truth that could affect your community, hit subscribe now and turn on notifications. Our investigations have already saved lives, and your support keeps this vital work going. Don't miss our next revelation. Subscribe now, because what you don't know can hurt you. Join our community of truth seekers today.